Welcome to everybody, and a very warm welcome to John Luke Edwards, who's talking to us from Lincolnshire, and Josephine Sellers, my friend and colleague. And we're going to be talking to John Luke today. And so I think, Josie, you're going to introduce him because you've known him for many years, haven't you?
I have indeed. So welcome, John Luke. It's a pleasure to speak with you today. And I'm going to open up and say over to you, John Luke. Tell us about yourself and your work and what you're doing in the future and anything else. Over to you.
Probably the most scary words out, aren't there? You know, sometimes you just like people to ask you a question. It's much easier than come up with an answer.
Can I ask you something then, John Luke?
Yeah, thank you, John.
Because I know that you've just returned from Canada back to the UK, and I'm just wondering why that is. I mean, obviously you were born here, presumably, and you have roots.
Yes, I was born here, yes.
Right.
Why have I come back? You know, we spent 17 years in Canada. And I think there's just a time where you move on. I mean, people read an awful lot into why I moved back. We started a community in Canada, a community, albeit much smaller, in the States. And we now have our community in India. And it felt like maybe I need to be somewhere else, and perhaps a community in England and Europe. In fact, my colleague Beatrice Simmons, who is one of our ordained ministers in Switzerland, she has this idea that we'll open a European UK community. Well, that's great. We'll look at that. I think part of it was, I'd like to say that this is a retirement thing. But when you're a priest of any sort, retirement isn't one of those things that you can actually just turn on and turn off. And so I arrived back, I reduced the work in Canada, handing it over to some great people who took over the community in Canada for me, and came back, and the whole idea was to have a year or so relaxing and maybe write a book or something. Well, that's not happened. I came back, I think we were one of the last flights to actually be allowed into England. We did get to buy a house, and now we're in lockdown in Lincolnshire, which is a strange place. It's very flat. I'm not good with flat. I've just come from a place where the mountains are phenomenal, overlooking the ocean, and here I am living in a little bungalow in the middle of a huge flat expanse. So I'm learning to deal with that, and in a sense, that's quite relevant right now, where all of us, all over the world, you know, when I talk to the people in India, and I talk to Beatrice in Switzerland, I talk to my colleagues in Canada, we're all having to deal with things that we're not really comfortable with. We're all finding ourselves in a place which we wouldn't really have chosen. And so being here in Lincolnshire, in this little bungalow, house sitting, and very cold and very windy. Today there's no wind. I shouldn't say that out loud, they're probably good. You sit and think, okay, why am I here? And one of the things about animism is the moment. Nothing else exists as far as animus. And when we talk about animism, there are various types of animism. It would be wrong for me to say, and this is animism. This is a very specific form of animism. This is totemic animism, and it belongs to a very specific tradition, the Sajik. So I can only talk mostly from that perspective, although I will try and open it up. Totemic animism is everything's going in the same direction, really. That's it. The concept of animism is that everything is alive. Everything has anima. Everything has spirit. Everything has breath. And in the Sajik, the word for breath and soul and song is the same word. And so we're great believers that everything has the same song. We're all singing the same song. We just sing it from our own unique voice, our own unique perspective of where we find ourselves here in Lincolnshire. What's the song for me right now that is part of a greater song? And thinking about where we all are now, it's time to stop and think not how did we get here, not even and where are we going, but here we are, the present moment. In Sujik Animism, we say te sana, and te sana is a strange concept. It doesn't translate into English very well, but it means roughly everything is in the moment and the moment is everything. The word te is, if you were to translate it into English, sort of means God. But for an animist, we don't have gods. There is no God. There is no superior being, which at times when you're stuck in the middle of Lincolnshire, feeling a little bit desperate and a bit depressed, you don't have a God to fall on your knees and say, oh, please help. There's nobody to help. There's nobody to help. And so for animists, unless you're born into it, there's a bit of a struggle if you're used to having some deity to kind of dump everything on. In Sujik Animism, we say there are the 3 R's, and these are responsibility. I've forgotten them. Responsibility, reverence, and relationship. And those 3 are about who we are in any given moment, our relationship with each other, our reverence to each other, and our responsibility to each other. Because if we're all the same soul, the same spirit, within us all is everything that's happening. So when people say, how did we get here? What is this virus thing? Where are we? I think we're asking the wrong question. The question we should be asking ourselves is, what are we doing here? Who am I that I'm doing something here? Not where did it come from? Let's not all fall into the trap of, which I see started. It wasn't going to take too long for someone said, it's your fault we've got the virus. And that didn't come as a big surprise. And on the news this morning, I was saying, when are we going to get out of it? What are we going to do afterwards? Can we just stop? And I think that's that's one of the things that the virus is trying to teach us, that how do we take our eye off the ball? How do we lose our relationship with each other? How did we fall out of reverence for each other? If we have no God, in animism, everything is equal, because everything is alive, whether it be me or a speck of cosmic dust. They're equally viable, they're equally alive, they're equally part of creation. And within each unique vessel of the song is all the information of creation. So rather than look externally and say, why is that happening over there? How did that happen? It's already inside us. So we could be sitting very quietly in this time of self-isolation, which I had to be really honest, because I'm very human and say I hate every moment of it. I'm not good at sitting and doing nothing. And there you are. I'm thinking, there you are, Max. There you are. Here I am, stuck in a flat place, and I'm slightly agoraphobic, in a bungalow, bad childhood memories, and doing nothing. It gives me time to think, who am I in this moment? How did I take my eye off the ball and find myself here? And when we get to that place, we start to have a deeper relationship with each other, the world, the computer, Facebook, the food I'm going to cook, all those things that we took for granted. And something that comes along like this virus, which, it's obviously been here all the time. I'm not a great believer in someone made this. And even if they did made it, they took part of the earth to make it. But it's given us the opportunity to be more present with ourselves, more present with each other, more present with who we are in the moment and what can I do with that. And I think we've forgotten that. We're no longer responsible for anything except what's in my iPhone or what's on the TV or locked in four walls, what's in these four walls. There's that thing, and I'm going to get the pronunciation right, the Hono Ono, I think I've missed an Ono out of there, which is the Hawaiian shamanic term that in order to heal externally, we heal internally. And there's this amazing story of a Hawaiian practitioner, I think he was Hawaiian, who was asked by a forensic unit to come and work with the patients there who were locked in this unit. And he said, yes, I'll think about that. Can you send me all their files? And they sent him all the files. And the story says that, months went by. And eventually the hospital kind of contacted him and said, oh, we sent you all those files, have you changed your mind? And he said, no, I've not changed my mind. Can you tell me why you've called me? And he said, well, things have changed here, and we've reduced medication. In fact, we've started to discharge some of our patients. And he said, okay, give me the names of the ones that you still have. And they told him, and he picked up the files and he said, well, leave those with me. And eventually, as the story goes, that those people got discharged. And so what he said when he was asked, he said, I looked inside and forgave myself for what was in those files, taking that responsibility for who we are, so that if we have a child that's hungry and dying in a far-off country, and TV, English TV, I'm trying to get used to English TV again, the constant send money, send money, send money. And the great way they do that by producing images that are heartbreaking, until eventually you get so disturbed by them that you kind of either look away, or that's the time to go outside and get your cup of coffee, so you don't have to see that. And what I always say is, no, stop and look at those. And how you feel, ask yourself, what are you doing about feeling that way? Not how can you send money, and it'd be nice to send money, but how do you feel right now? And how can you come to terms with that feeling? Not even necessarily take the feeling away, but how can you come to terms with the feeling that that image generates for you? And that creates an alternate reverence, relationship in this thing that we call, oh dear, I've got to use other terms, the ananya. The ananya is the friction between the manifest world and the spirit world. It's the closest thing we have to soul. And when we are honest and in relationship with our feelings, when something stimulates that, we change the friction within the ananya, which changes the world. I remember at university, the thing they used to drum into us continuously, you can't change the world, you can only change yourselves. And I believe that, but I'd like to change that a bit and say the way the world comes to terms with its truth is by you coming to terms with your truth. You might not be able to change yourself. I work in Canada with lots of people who would come to me because they would go to doctors or they'd go to other healers, and people say, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say, or we've done the best. And they would come to me, and I was kind of always at the bottom of the ladder going, see John Luke, he deals with the crazy people. And one of the things you do is you say to people, I can't fix this for you. But what I can do is together we can come to a place of management, understanding why you're here. And I had one gentleman who came and saw me for about 3.5 years. Every week he would turn up. And he was very disturbed. The most beautiful man going, actually quite a famous man. He was in the movies. Canada, everybody's in the movies. And he would sit with me, and I would sing, and I would drum, and I would do some laying on of hands, and we'd sit and we'd talk about how I felt about how he was feeling. And that would take about 2 hours. Then he'd fall asleep. And I'd sit there with him. He would sleep for about 20 minutes. And I'd sit there with you, and then he would get up. He'd say, well, nothing's changed, and kind of storm out. But at the same time next week, there he was. And we did this for 3.5 years. And one day he said, nothing's happening, nothing's happening. So I said, so how's work doing? He said, I haven't got time to talk about work, nothing's happening, I'm feeling it. I said, no, how's work doing? And he said, oh, I've got to be careful what I say here. I've got a part in, and I went, oh, you got a job. And I said, it's not an insignificant job, it's a part in a TV series. Yeah, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about. And sometimes he couldn't see that he was in fact changing simply by spending time with being present with his feelings. I tell everybody, and if people are listening to me here, one of the things I learned at university was to be present, ready, and available. That's the generosity we have to be great healers. Healers means not to fix things, not to cure things, but to make things whole, to reunite things. So we have a virus like this where we're looking and think, okay, how am I responsible in some tiny little way for us being fractured, for us not being complete? And that's, if there's a message that the virus, which is part of that virus, if in true animist belief, exists within us all. It's part of us. It was part of creation, the same as the starlight. It's part of creation. It has a purpose. We will have a purpose. And rather than fight purpose, we perhaps need to embrace it. When the earthquake happens and everybody complains that, I've lived here and this earthquake comes and look, all the houses have been devastated. What are we going to do about this? Let's bring some healing to the earth, a statement I really hate. And I'd say, well, stop a minute, because the earth is a living being too. In fact, it's the same living being that we are. What's our responsibility with it? What's our relationship with it? Maybe we shouldn't be there. I think humans have to take the great step of their evolution and say, it's time to stop being at the top of the pile. We never were. It's not our earth. It's not our land. Living in Canada and working with the First Nations there, how many people would say, and this is our land, this is where we live. And the elders of the tribe I would work with would go, who said you owned it? We don't own this land. This is just where we are right now. And we are grateful for the land allowing us to be there. And I think we've lost that gratitude for who we are and where we are. And to be that present, ready, and available, to be responsible, to be relational, to be reverence with a world that is constantly reminding us that we're out of relationship with it. There's a story about, and I'm not quite sure which tradition it comes from, the great spirit Tiwana. And the great spirit Tiwana creates all the animals first and sends them to Earth. And after a while, he calls them back and he says, you've all got, I'm sure he says it in a much better way, but he says, you've all got the hang of this Earth thing, have you? And they all agree that it's great. I'm now going to create my last masterpiece. Mm-hmm. It's called a human being. And it's going to be very fragile. And I want all of you to take care of it. And they all agree that this is what they're going to do. And within very long, they're all battering at Tiwana's door saying, hold on a minute. This human being is, how can we take care of someone who kills us and eats us and chops us down and you know, and Tirana says, the lesson is in you surrendering to his behavior. In the Sajik, we have a slightly different version of that, where it's called Te Reanad, which means stars falling. This is just in our creation story. The ancestors, the ancestral spirits, fall to earth through the great tree. They're the stars, and they fall to the great. And all the animals come first, and this is a very specific order. The first one being Loshkan, the frog, to create the oceans. And all the animals descend, all the beings, all the rocks and all the forests, everything that is creation descends to the great tree. And the very last ancestral spirit announces, I don't know, that they're going to arrive. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, so all the world is waiting at the roots of the great tree for the last ancestor to arrive. And when it arrives, it's a pink little wriggly weak thing and just lies there, not breathing. And remember, for us, soul and breath and song are the same word. And the great spirit, in the form of Bo, the great mother cow, comes up and she breathes into the nostrils of the baby and shares the song, not her song, the song with the child, and encourages all the animals to come and do this at the same time. So the child is brought to life by the wisdom and the knowledge and the soul of everything that already existed. Behind the great tree is a spirit which was supposed to cover her eyes when you mention his name, Dagradar. And Dagradar is a wily thing, and he disapproves of this. He disapproves of the animals sharing their song with this child. And he disapproves because he says that the human child will never be grateful, will never be grateful, will expect that this was a gift rather than a sharing. But he would be ready, and he looks on his shoulder. On his shoulder is the spirit called Danather. And Danather is a robin. And Danather is the spirit that carries the dead back wherever they came from. And he looks at the robin and he says, you and I are going to be working very hard in many years to come. And then the story goes on where the human kind of messes things up even more. And I think that's it. I think we just expect that everything's laid out on a plate for us. And here we have a microorganism who is actually telling us, no, you're not in charge here. You're not in charge. Stop, think about where you are. Think about your responsibility to the same place that we call home. And I'm rambling.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
They're big philosophies for people to take on in this hugely materialistic, bonkers world, John Luke.
Every year we would have a great conference in Canada. And now the conferences, for me, have moved to India, although the Bangalore government have stopped us from holding one this year. And every year I would, it was a great big venue, which was an old pavilion, which they would build a great big tent over. And in the center of this pavilion was this huge bonfire. I mean, it was kept going for the whole 7 days of the conference. And I would stand up and I would walk up to this fire and I said, you know, the trouble is we've just all fallen out of relationship with each other, and we need to get back into a more intimate relationship with each other. And I put my hand in my pocket and I take out my cell phone. It's a mobile phone in England. I've got to learn a new language again. And I hold this up and I said, you know, this is the cause of me being separate. because I'd say I didn't want any cell phones to come into this sacred area. And, and people would be, and I'd go, excuse me, I'm talking. And I'd hold this phone and I said, and I think what we have to do is we have to break these phones. And I'd say, and then throw it into this fire. Really dangerous thing to do. And I'd stand there and I'd walk around this thing and I said, but I'll do this tomorrow. And every morning I put my hand in my pocket and say, this is the addiction. This is the addiction of wanting to be caught in the three fears. There are three great fears: loneliness, abandonment, and being different. And every piece of technology keeps us in those three fears. And so long as we're in those three fears, we can't be responsible, reverent, or relational. We're trapped in those three fears. In fact, the whole of the world as we know it, our story says, was created by the first man because of the fear. And we're all caught in his fear. And the animals, the world, everything, choose to come into the world to try and wake us up from this dream. And here we have a tiny, tiny little microorganism that is in some way trying to wake us up. And I'm not belittling it, that it's devastating us. And yet, one of the problems of being an animist priest is to look at a much bigger picture. And sometimes people think, oh, John, look, you're really kind of very unkind. And I'll go, I can be kind in the moment. And you all go, that's just so wonderful. But the next moment will suffer because of that. So it's best to be honest to look at the whole thing and say, where's our responsibility here? Yeah, I have the TV on every morning and I hear people telling the stories of how ill they were, how separated they are. But nobody's thinking, what am I doing here? How did we find ourselves sitting here on TV talking about it? I've worked in hospices and I've seen and sat with people who are dying, and it's awful. It's awful. But there's that last moment when someone takes their last breath and you're sat with them and there's a moment of, this is the only important thing. Not how I got to dying, but the dying. And it's a conversation for another time, this moment of realization that the moment is the only thing that matters. And in that moment is everything that, not that we could be, that we are. I always tell people that rather than be who we have to be, let us be who we truly are, who I was meant to be, not who I have to be. And every child is born, and within minutes of birth, have to take on that have to. They have to take on a gender, they have to take on a name, they have to take on the toy truck that comes along. And they do that because if they don't, they won't get loved, they won't, they fall into the three fears. And most of our lives are caught up in doing what we have to in order to be accepted, not to be alone, not to be abandoned, to be taken care of. And we've got so used to that. We've got so used to that. I've got to have the cell phone, because if I don't have the cell phone, I might miss out on something. I've got to be on Facebook. And if I'm not on Facebook, I might miss something. I miss something all the time. I just saw a message this morning. I'm thinking, that was the 3rd of May, and what happened? I missed it. The world didn't come to an end. The world didn't come to an end. And there's a more generous way of being together. And that generosity is being generous with how we feel in the moment. Don't turn away from the disturbing image on the TV or whatever, but be generous with that feeling. Even if it's just being generous to yourself, share that generosity. And that's shared by being present, with how you're feeling right now, being ready for whatever happens next, and being available to whoever needs you.
John-Luc, can I ask you about you mentioned about your communities that you've started in things, and I'm just wondering how all this plays out within the communities, or what's the purpose of the communities in what you've been talking about just now, and also, can I ask, you mentioned a phrase, becoming, I think, who I'm meant to be, and that's an interesting phrase. Who is it that's just this word meant? I mean, whose agenda are we talking about?
It's more important not to be, like, as I said the word meant, I think that's not the word. It's more important not to be the people we have to be.
Yeah, okay.
That's the more important thing. We have destiny, and that is that relationship between creation and the spirit that creates that friction, and that friction is who I was destined to be. Maybe destiny is a better word than meant to be. Many clients would come into me and said, I meant to do this. And I'd sit there and shake my head and think, no, who tells you that? And that's absolutely right. There's another word I'm massively looking for right now. As for the communities, to be honest, the reason the first community came together was so that we could play the legal game, which is so that our ministers could be ordained in law. And that was honestly the reason why we started the community. And you had to have so many people who would be part of the community. And then you could be recognized as a religion, which was the great, oh my God, we're really going to be doing that. But then we could have our own ministers and our own licenses. And then the community kind of spread more than that. It was about being able to come together and be ready, present, and available, and not feel strange. I mean, to be a Sajik animist, there's a lot of very strange things that we would do. In fact, a lot of our rituals and ceremonies are rituals and ceremonies that have never been changed. They're very old. And people would say, well, why do you do that? And I said, well, that's the way our ancestors did it. And we don't change things because society changes. We try to maintain a traditional outlook. And so the people could come together and be in ceremony and not feel outcast in any way.
And ceremony and ritual, I personally feel, is what, in the culture that I've been brought up in this Western world, is missing, and there's a disconnect from who we really are. So for me, for a lot of people, we probably turn more to the natural world, but many people don't live in environments where they can connect. I think you begin to feel that sort of altruistic, loving connection to everything. It's easy when you live in a beautiful place. It's not so easy when you live in the middle of a great big city. I know you talk about coming home to yourself, and I do agree with you that if your heart goes out to someone, you see suffering somewhere terrible in the world, and you sit with that, something comes up from deep within you. I suppose I would only describe it, I suppose, is just love, really. And is that act of that feeling that comes up in its own way is healing, healing to that very soul you're looking at on the other side of the world in agony and hardship.
One of the things that St. Francis of Assisi, one of the things he was criticized most for was that when he set up his houses, they were not like other religious orders. They were not on high mountains in the wilderness and in the beautiful places where God would be. St. Francis insisted that they were right in the poorest area, the hardest area. And even now you can find Franciscan houses in the worst places of town, not in nice places. And Francis would say, because that's where we're meant to be. Okay, we become the garden for others. We become the soft wind for others. We become the beautiful place for others. We can't go and sit on a mountain and talk to God and then not bring that experience back and be the mountain for the place that is concrete. That is very hard. But as an animist, the beautiful mountain and the forest and the garden are already within me. I'm just not in relationship with it.
Yeah.
So if I become in relationship with it, then other people can come. One of the things I teach is that love is not something we do. So we don't fall in love. We are moments of love. And so where I am, people can fall into me. They can fall into love that way. And we have to be that garden that people can come in. We have to be that moment of love that people can fall into. And that's being much, one of the things that about simple things is they're really hard to do. Hard things are easy because we know.
It's also very beautiful. It's a very beautiful space to get into. So if you were part of a community that would come together certain times,
once a year we would have a physical coming together, there would be 100, 120 people. I think our biggest one was 180 people.
Yeah.
And yet, monthly we would have maybe a dozen people get together living in Vancouver. The ocean is the coast, the water's everywhere. We would have water ceremonies, ocean ceremonies.
Lovely.
Once a month. We'd have a moon ceremony once a month. Somebody would suddenly say, there's, I'm feeling really bad about the pipeline, and we'd all go and do a ceremony about. Ceremony is this outward sign, this visible demonstration of the things that I've been talking about. This being present and ready and available, being that anan, being that te sanas. And I think then what happened is that people think, okay, I watch people, I'm asking people to do a ceremony on Facebook. And I've said, don't make this big, because people start to panic. Where am I going to get the stuff? Where am I going to go? Have I got words? And ceremony is an outward sign of this inward relationship, this relationship with the divine. And a ceremony, you've got to have more than one person. A ritual is just you, I think, something like that. So how do you do a ceremony when we're all in lockdown? So I think on Facebook, I've said on May the 8th, just full moon, the next full moon, which intriguingly is the moon of the cow, which is the first spirit that gave life to us and taught us the great song. I want everybody to light a fire, small fire. It can be a couple of twigs in a beer can. I have to be really careful what I say sometimes. Is that a good thing to say? I found a metal bowl in the place where I'm living, and I found some wooden chips that I've been saving. So I'm just going to put them in this little metal bowl, which is about as big as my hand. And I want people to put the fire outside, light this little fire outside, and look at the moon. And the first person or the first thought about something that's not them that comes into their head, they will hold and drop something into the fire to burn. End of ritual, end of ceremony. And if you start to question it, you're missing the point. So I'm asking people to do that, and perhaps if they really feel they want to share it, and people will do this, and they'll send a picture of the little fire burning. That's great. I think ceremony needs to be a lot simpler. Okay. When you're slicing the onion and crying, and the knife's hitting, making that sound on the board, that's a ceremony. You can make it a ceremony. Because if you come in a relationship with the onion and the knife, I promise you, your eyes won't water. Sometimes I think your eyes are watering because the onion is saying, what are you doing and not talking to me? If we sweep the floor and we are present and ready and available, it becomes ceremony, where it's not about us, it's about this sharing, about this being generous. Ceremony is just a visible sign of this divine relationship. So turn everything into ceremony. Be generous with it. You're sitting there feeling in a bad mood, turn it into ceremony. You're sitting there eating your flapjack and cup of tea. That's what I've got later on today. Make it a ceremony. Make it, it's not make it a ceremony. Acknowledge that it is a ceremony. That it is, as the food goes into your mouth, how does it taste? How do you feel about it? And hold all that and put it into this great animist melting pot and share, be generous with it. Be generous with how you're feeling.
In a way, it's radiating out to the whole.
Yes, yes.
It's a drip feed from you to the rest. Is that it?
So long as we don't go to the point, aren't I doing a good thing?
Oh, no, no.
The moment you go there, then we've made that isolation. And that's why this fire ceremony that I put on Facebook, I've actually said, don't overthink it. Don't ask why you're doing this. Don't ask what should
flow.
Yeah, and that would and just make it that. And the other one I'm saying we could do that every full moon. And I would put the stories of each moon that came up. And the other one that we used to do daily, especially at the big gatherings, we would have a bowl of water with a rock in it. And people would come and they would take some water in their hand and just let the water fall from their hand onto the rock. Remembering something that was sad. It's a very specific one. It's about forgiveness. This is the forgiveness ritual. And just letting the water fall on the rock and standing there for a few minutes, don't let anything else come in your head and then walk away. We did it, the bowl and the rock were at the doorway to the main pavilion at the conferences in Canada and in India, where they're very used to that kind of ritual. No morning would start without the rock and water being poured onto it, and no thought about why am I doing this? It's just somewhere I'm taking responsibility for something that suddenly comes into my head, and here's some water on the rock. And those are two pieces of work that I'm asking people to do right now, because it focuses that generosity. It focuses that moment of being present for people, being present for, I don't know, the same advert that shows me the children in Africa who are suffering also shows me the dogs and cats that are being abused. And I can walk down the road, this is Lincolnshire, apparently they do this in Lincolnshire, and see a whole row of trees that have just been cut down, which alarms me greatly. Bees and trees, once we've got rid of those, the world ends. To cut down trees which are the songs of the world. And so if I feel that way, I'm not going to petition and I should. See, there I should. I could go and protest. But maybe what I do is I take that grief and I go and make a ceremony of it and make an offering. And I would suggest that some people might say, well, that's not enough. That's not enough. That's a bit self-indulgent when we could be out there taking food to the hungry. Sure, we could be out there taking food to the hungry. You know, we ran a soup tent in Canada. We would feed the homeless every second week. And people then start to say, oh, aren't you great for doing this? Aren't you good for doing this? And I would feel that's not what we're doing this for. This was as equal importance as standing in the forest, Vancouver, loads of forests, with a few people and just putting your hands on the earth and being present with how the earth was feeling, or how the sky was feeling, or how our friends in America were feeling. Sorry, wicked grin on my face. How people were hungry in another part of the world. It's about being in relation with the whole and not taking any importance in that.
A resonance.
A resonance. We do a lot of work on resonance.
Feels like a resonance, and it's yes, it's very beautiful.
It's, and I won't lie. It's hard work because we're all caught in the three fears.
Absolutely.
So suddenly you go, I really just I was saying earlier before we started that I just had surgery in a hospital, and I have to be honest and say sometimes I sit there and think, poor me. And then you get away from that and think, okay, what did I miss? What did I not learn? I learned that fresh cream chocolate eclairs are a no-no for the rest of my life. I learned that maybe I shouldn't have eaten so many. That was a worry. I think the other thing that I'm often accused of is seemingly being irreverent. We were given a sense of humor, and I don't have much of a sense of humor to share as well. This generosity, it's not just about sharing these deep sacred moments, because everything is a deep sacred moment, but to share the stillness, to share the silence, to share the laughter, to share the tears. Let's just get used to sharing, then we'll worry about whether we should share it or not. I think we've fallen out of the habit of sharing.
And in coming together from time to time allows us probably to get more of a habit to be present far more than we are maybe just the majority of us for a few minutes a day. That every action is a very mindful action, isn't it?
It is, but we've been in this addiction for a long time.
Yes, I know.
Most of the human race as well, life. So we might not be able to do it tomorrow.
No.
We do a little bit. We can do a little bit. Maybe we can light a fire. Maybe I can take that last flapjack that I'm really quite looking forward to, and maybe I can just go and put it on the bird table.
Yeah.
I'm going to give that some thought. But maybe there's this moment of sacrifice, which doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be huge. Sacrifice is to make something sacred, to change something that's personal into something that's sacred for everyone else. It's a flapjack, though. It's the last one in the house. I got to think about that. So being in a place of sacrifice is again, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. So just do small things to start with. I think about 4 years ago, I asked everybody to bake a cake and take it round to their neighbours. Just go and bang on the neighbour's door and say, I brought you a cake. That didn't go down terribly well. And I asked people to deal with how that was not well received. How did that feel when people just look at you as you're crazy? A lot of people did get, thank you for making me a cake. But in doing that, just coming out of your comfort zone for a while, and it was just a small thing to do. It was just a little thing to do, bake a cake and take it around next door. Not about, aren't I good to making a cake? Because some of us can't make cakes. Some of us actually nip to the shop and buy one and take it around. But we'd never admit to that. But the very fact that we were trying to take a moment just not to be who we had to be, but to be something more than that. So maybe it's just something small. Maybe it's to do this little fire ritual on full moon night, which is Friday. Maybe it's to find a nice rock and drip some water on it and not question it. Maybe it's to take a walk when we're allowed to do that, and look at what you're passing. You know, one of the things that I'm sure I used to teach in Bournemouth too, was to, when you're walking along the pavement in a city, is to actually look at the colours. It's not just grey. It's an inconceivable amount of colour. And no way could any human design the patterns of concrete. They happen because that's the will of creation and the colours in it. I mean, just take some time to do that and share that wonder. In India, I talk a lot about wonder. Wonder. We've got wonder.
I think sometimes when we are in places which might feel of great adversity, or you're in hospital for 6 weeks and you don't see anything that's colourful, and you come out and the world suddenly, wow, I never saw you before.
True. That's it.
So
do
maybe
that.
Part of this now for us all is that if we do re-emerge out of this, we'll see things we never saw or were important before, as opposed to the glittery things of life.
That's right.
The real things. Another person's face, you know, just to stand opposite someone and actually,
so long as you're not standing too close.
No, feel them. You know, things that we've taken for granted.
And I think that's it. That's when we've fallen out of this reverence for the world. And the world has not fallen out of reverence with us.
No.
You know, the way the world treats us is reverent, is compassionate. And yet we're not the same back. We're really not. You know?
John, look, when you talk about things like reverence and ritual and offering and song, and you're assuming there is something bigger than us, right? There is some kind of ordering, nurturing principle that is bigger than what we can see, that is behind the scenes kind of thing. Would that be, because I don't know much about animism, so I'm coming from a place of ignorance here. And, you know, my sense, my internal sense is there is a higher intelligence, for example. Now, whether you call that God or you call it spirit or whatever you call it, but there is some ordering and nurturing principle.
Okay.
I would call it a divine intelligence, but perhaps that's not the kind of words that you would use, right?
I'm just being careful here. So as an animist, a traditional animist doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in a superior power. So that we start off with that. One of the pieces I'm working on now, and I started working on it in India, is the Reclamation of God in animist practice.
Okay.
Which was a bit scary and controversial. There's no such thing as God, and now I'm writing a paper on the Reclamation of God in Animism. And the concept of Te, this vibration, is, and I hate to do this, but it's a good way to start. It's like the Force in Star Wars. Not that I ever watched those films. It's that, but that energy, that sentience, that compassion, that love, that song is created out of everything in creation's relationship with themselves. That relational energy is Te, is God. Does that mean to say that when creation reunites, unifies, heals itself, God will be left? I don't know. I'm still working on this. This concept, but John, I think the quickest answer is yes. Yes, there is something. There is something. I don't think anybody can say it's this.
No.
But whatever this is comes out of from an animist perspective, our relationship with everything else. It's that friction, the friction that creates this. And when we don't relate and we don't create that friction, this energy of Te, God, is somehow lessened. It's not an omnipotent energy. It's an energy that got fractured. And part of our destiny, the same as everything in creation, is to reunite that force, that energy, that God. I think it's the Baha'i who say that there was God, and then God asked the question who, and God shattered. And it's everyone's responsibility to work out the answer to that and reform God.
I suppose what you're saying is also that we're more kind of facilitators in that process rather than the masters of it, where we tend to think we're the masters, but we're not really.
We're not. But at the same time, and it'll depend on, and here I'm speaking to the world, we're also co-creators. We are elements of God. And when we are in everything I've been talking about, then that element becomes a force that does direct us and move us and carry us. And a colleague of mine, Jeff Stockton, and I wrote a very short chant, which is a child crying in the darkness for its parent. And we wrote that very specifically because we are human and we need a divine parent. And I don't think, animist, whatever, I don't think that's wrong for a child to want a parent. And so we wrote this very short chant, and it just gets repeated and repeated. And we use it a lot to calm things, to...
Would you be able to sing it for us before we
Absolutely not. You know, as I'm speaking this, I'm thinking someone's going to ask me that. No, so I write the words and Jeff writes the music because Jeff can sing. John Luke can't sing. I will send a link. I'll send a link. I could do that. I can send a link of Jeff singing it. But a lot of the songs that Jeff and I wrote were weren't about singing to God or saying how wonderful we were. It's about being human. And being human, we probably are being given an ideal opportunity to reevaluate. Yeah. Being human is something that is completely different than we thought it was. It's something quite vulnerable. It's something that only exists because it links and shares with everything else. It's not being human is not an event that's isolated. It's not a one-off. It only exists because of a relationship with everything else.
I suppose it comes back to a little bit what you were saying about that phrase that you said you hated the phrase healing the earth, but like I suppose then we tend to see it ourselves, don't we, as beings on this earth rather than being completely interdependent and you know part of, well, there isn't any separate. I mean, we're made from the earth, aren't we? We breathe air from the earth. I mean, everything in it. So there isn't that separation that we tend to think of.
That's true. In the creation story, the song of the stars descends through the tree, and the earth hears the song, and she answers the song from her being elements, and the two songs meet, and at that point they create body and soul unique for everything that lives. And so yes, we are of the earth, but we're not masters of it. We're not in control. So when I hear people say let's heal the earth, people need to be very careful about that, Because if we want to be very blunt, one of the really great healings for the earth would be to get rid of human beings.
Yes.
If we're really blunt. And so I have a great problem when people say, let's do an earth healing ceremony. I'll go, yeah, well, I'm not quite ready to die just yet. Because that would be the healing. Maybe what we need to do is what I started talking about is that healing is about being whole within ourselves, being responsible within ourselves. You know, in British Columbia, the government are determined to put through oil pipelines right through pristine forest, right through native land. It's going to cause devastation. And I can see that it's going to bring lots of work to people. And, you know, you have to sit with it and think, I'm confused, I don't know, and be in your confusion. But one of the things I used to get really upset about was people who would get in their cars and drive to the protests. Mm-hmm. And I'd go, really? Or they would go out on their plastic dinghies and beat drums at the oil platforms. And I'd go, yeah, what's your dinghy made of? What was the fuel that got you out there? How many of you are actually protesting outside car manufacturers? Why aren't we in schools educating people that say walking's okay, you don't need a car? And while we're talking about oil and plastic, isn't it time to break that cell phone? And you would get back to it somehow. I think we just need to be a little bit more honest with ourselves. You know, just before I left Canada, all but one tribe had said, you know, we're going to allow this pipeline because we need the money. You know, our men need work. And having worked on a reservation, I can see that. I have great sympathy for that. That without work, the men, and not just the men, the people sit around and all that's left is alcohol and cigarettes. And, you know, I think almost every week someone would die of a drug overdose. And I would think, so okay, a pipeline would stop that. Mm. Maybe it would bring worse. I don't really know. And so I think before I get into my car and drive and protest, I have to think, what's my responsibility here? How can I be present in this? I don't think there are easy answers. And I think when people say, I've got an answer, we need to be careful about that. I don't think the answer's a one-off event. I think humans have become so dependent on oil, on plastic, on computers, on money, that to say we must stop this, we must. Who's saying we must? We need to look at ourselves and just try and devolve, not evolve. Become simpler, I'm learning to walk. Because I'm supposed to do this 5 miles every day, but there's nothing else to do here. So I do this walk and I've learned to cook nettles. I'm quite surprised how tasty they are. And there's something about the wonder of simple life. Having spent time in a monastery where it was, and you suddenly go, oh, I remember that. Mm. There wasn't any stress. When we're in India, the ashram we go and work at, it's pointless saying, what's for lunch? It's pointless because the women who live in the villages around, they come and cook the food. And the food they cook is whatever they pick on the way. And so you can't say what's for lunch. And sometimes you look at it and go, isn't that what we had yesterday? And they'd go, no, it's got this in it. And this might just be something they found on the road, which sounds really awful. But there was something much simpler than that. And no internet. It was just amazing. And heated by the sun.
In our progress, our so-called civilized, evolving process of civilization, we have completely lost who we really are, what we really are. And that's a sadness, great sadness.
We've just taken a wrong turn.
Yes.
But the good thing about being a totemic animist is that all roads eventually join up again. We have this, we don't have a hello and goodbye. And I can't remember. So we would say when we're saying goodbye to somebody, we always say, till our paths meet again, because they will. And when we meet someone, we always say, how fortunate we are to be together. Because in the end, we're all part of some, I'm careful of John's question now, we're part of some direction. I was going to say plan, or part of some direction. I'm sure that one day someone will tell us what it is.
Some energetic flow.
Someone will just tell us, I did spend some time in a seminary, and we would all say that next time we die, we'll go and see if we can argue with God and say, excuse me, can you just, and God would say, but I've told you. Well, can you help us remember next time?
Thank you so much. I think we should probably wind up now, John-Luc.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was really wonderful.
John, how will we find out about how people watching find out about when you move forward and you begin to consider setting up animist community in Europe or here, wherever? How will we find out about
Well,
that?
I do have a Facebook page, which I hardly ever use. I will try and write something on that. I do have a website, which is...
Can we put those up for you, John?
I can put those up, thank you. And the website I looked at this morning, I'm thinking I really need to come to, it's got a lot of training on there, and I'm going to rewrite that so people can be... My first thing is really just to train some firewalkers. I think that's the easiest way to do. First thing to do, because that's a lot of fun, but it also it's a great base to understand community and being together, building a fire ceremony and then walking on it. And then it would be probably a nice idea to train a set of ministers for UK. And the Bangalore Facebook page has a lot about the Bangalore retreat, which is coming up. We had to postpone the October, which talks a lot about how we've forgotten. We've had to postpone that because everything's in lockdown there. But Dipanka, who's written it, is talking about early next year. So there's lots of information. Just have to look in the right places. Facebook pages, my website, which I will update in the next couple of days.
Okay, so can we put your website up underneath you, John?
Yes.
So people have got a point of contact and reference.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Great, thank you.
Thank you greatly.
Thank you very much.